Hello, welcome to the Succeed Without Selling Salon. Today we're talking about selling, which is one of my favorite topics. And that is because I think we have some misunderstandings about selling. I think there are people who are afraid of selling or don't feel comfortable doing the things that you need to do in order to sell. So listen, if you are joining me on Facebook or on YouTube, say hi. Stick something in the chat. Let me know that you're here. If you have a question or a comment, please add it. I'm going to start by giving you an idea of what I think selling is all about. Okay, so I think that selling is what happens when you are in a meeting with a prospect. And the reason why I separate it out and say that, prospecting is everything up until that point is because I think there are too many people who are trying to sell when they should be prospecting. And prospecting is activity that you undergo to get a meeting, not get a sale, not get a piece of business. You engage in this behavior to figure out who you think you should be having a conversation with so that you can discover whether they are someone who you should be engaged in a business relationship with. So, and here's the struggle that so many people think, because they've been told that everyone is a potential prospect, that they should always be closing, that a networking event isn't a success unless they walk out with a piece of business, and like none of that stuff is true. The truth is that what you are really looking for is a conversation with someone who looks like they might have a situation that you can help them with. And the only way you know whether you do and whether you want to work with them, which I'll get to in a minute, is by getting the meeting and having the conversation. Now, that conversation is not you talking about your product or service and you trying to convince them that they need what you have to sell. That conversation is you asking questions and listening to what they tell you, actively listening to whatever they tell you without an agenda other than learning. Because see, when we're open to learning, we listen with a different set of ears than if we are thinking that we have to make a sale. Because if we're thinking we have to make a sale, the way that we're listening is sort of half, like we're going through the motions because we know we're just going to tell them what it is we think they need. Selling is really about matching your solution to a problem, and the only way you know whether you can do that is by going through your discovery. At the same time, you want to be sure that the prospect is a company or a person who you want to be working with, because not every piece of business is a good piece of business. And we have a bad habit of going for any business, not really going through the process of discovery and decision making and realizing that we're interviewing them like they're interviewing us, right? I mean, this is a two-way street here. And we end up with clients that are just terrible and they hurt our business instead of help it. So the selling conversation should be a discovery mission. You should be on an expedition to find out as much as you possibly can about that prospect. And that includes things like how they decision make, if they've considered a budget, if they've worked with a company like yours before, and if so, what was their experience? What was good about it? What would they change if they could? We're trying to really find out how they work, how they deal with vendors, because however they deal with vendors is how they're going to deal with you. And so it goes beyond the actual thing that you sell, right? It goes beyond the problem that they have, because you got to know all these things. And I will bet that if you've ever been in a situation where you went to the sales meeting, you talked about your product or service, you did your trial closes, you got the nods, you did whatever, then you gave them a proposal, and you either couldn't get them back on the phone, or you couldn't get another meeting with them, or they told you that it was out of their budget. All of those things are because you didn't ask enough questions. So if you think about, how do you know if you're a good resource for a prospect? You know when you've gotten answers to all the questions that have to do with them being a client. So budget is one, decision making, problem solving, payment terms, um, expectations, implementation schedules, all of these things you need answers to in order for you to be able to identify whether it even makes sense for you to give them a proposal. Because it might not, right? If they're not going to answer some of those questions, they don't want to work with you. And I know that's a tough thing, but seriously, you need all that information in order to be able to give them an honest assessment of what you can do for them. And the only way you can do that is if you get the answers to the questions. So it's about building the relationship and the trust, and being able to have that conversation where if they don't want to talk about budget, you can say to them, listen, I get it. You're not the first person who's told me they don't really want to share that information. So let's talk about it, because I can't effectively evaluate how I can help you and if I can help you if I don't have an idea of what your tolerance is. So it's being willing to have those conversations. It's being willing to not just say, oh, okay, you don't want to tell me what your budget is? Okay, well, let's keep going. And I'll go ahead and I'll just spitball it and I'll throw something out there and hopefully it works, right? If you think about the experiences that you've had in that selling conversation, think about, so a lot of times we know, okay, well, something broke down. It's my estimation that what broke down was one of two things. You didn't ask enough questions. You didn't ensure that you got the answers to those questions. And then you didn't have a next step before you left the conversation. So if you're one of those people who leaves a sales meeting, thinks to themselves, wow, that was so great. We just had a great meeting. We talked about all kinds of things, and that was really great. And then you can't re-engage. It's because you didn't have a next step that you both agreed to was going to happen. Okay. So was it really a great conversation? Chances are good there were a couple of things that were missing. So my viewpoint is create that list of questions that you need answers to. So there's the questions about the situation, and there's questions about them. And how we ask those questions matters. So, for example, no one likes the question, are you the decision maker? So they're not going to answer it. Or they're going to answer it and you're still not going to know whether they're the decision maker or not. But if you ask the question, would you mind sharing with me your decision-making process? So much easier. First of all, it's permission-based, so it's respectful. Second of all, you just want to hear the process that they go through, because that's going to tell you who the decision maker is. You're going to get your answer. And quite frankly, you're going to get more information than just, are you the decision maker? Because you're going to get a look behind the curtain about how do these people go through their own process of deciding what vendor they're going to use. You want that information because that gives you information you wouldn't otherwise have. You want to ask the question, have you ever worked with a company like ours before? If yes, would you mind sharing with me why you aren't still working with them? You might want to ask, would you mind sharing with me how it went? You know, what was good about it? What would you change if you could? to what degree, how long did you work with them? If they're currently working with a company like yours, the question would be, so help me understand what isn't working right now that you're open to having this conversation with me. Like, what's the situation that is there something you're looking to change? Is there something you're looking to improve upon? Whatever it is, because you want to know what the deal is. Do they always price shop? Are they never satisfied? What is it? Why are they talking to you if they're currently using a company like yours? They should be happy with them. They should be talking to them about whatever's going on. If they're talking to you, something else is going on here. Okay. So you want to know what their timeline is. What are they expecting in terms of turnaround? Is it realistic? Does it make sense? So some people have unrealistic expectations. You have to be able to have that conversation with them. What matters most to them? How do they problem solve? It's not really a great question, but really what you're trying to find out is, how do they deal with situations? Like if something goes wrong, what's their preferred method of resolution? What's their preferred communication structure? If you sell something that you need them to participate with you, so there's information you're going to need from them, do they understand that? Are they okay with an implementation schedule that lists out who needs to do what in what order and what the impact is if those things don't happen? So it's really finding out, who are they? How do they work? To some degree, what are their values? So that you can make sure that if indeed you enter into a relationship with them, it's going to be a good one for both of you. And then there's the budget question. And asking someone, do you have a budget for this, is not the world's greatest question. However, starting out with, have you considered a budget for this? Would you mind sharing with me what that is? When you're asking those questions about, have you worked with a company like ours before? Okay, if they have, then they have a sense of what they should expect to pay. So you can ask, once you know the answer to that, you can say, okay, would you mind, talking to me about, what did you think? Did you think you were getting value for your investment? Would you mind sharing with me what your annual spend was, or your monthly spend? But, whatever it is, having this sort of conversation allows you to really learn about who they are, but it does something else. It shows them that you're very professional, that you really care about entering into mutually beneficial relationships. So you're willing to ask these questions, that you're genuinely interested in the answers. And when you're doing the questioning instead of the talking, you're also letting them know that you really do, that it's more important to you to learn about them, to make sure that you can help them, than it is for you just to try and convince them about, you've got the greatest thing in the world, so they should buy it. See where I'm going with this? So everything you do up into the meeting is trying to get the meeting. So when you go networking, you're relationship building. You don't know who's in that room. My vote is, do not be looking for potential clients, because you're going to miss out on a lot of other really good relationships, and you're going to sort of give off that vibe that you're selling. Everything's about discovery. Everything's about relationship building. So be open, be interested in other people, don't have an agenda. And remember that as you meet people, some are going to be referral partners, some are going to be business friends, some are going to be potential clients, some are going to be nothing. It's all good, not a problem. Your job is to identify who is what, and you can't do it if you're focused on everyone being a potential client. So there's that discovery there. And then as you pull together a target market and you see who's in that market and you see how you're connected to them, your goal, or not connected to them, and you're going to have to, do some cold calling. That's all prospecting. That's all trying to get the meeting, trying to get the conversation, so that then you can ask your questions, you can get the answers that you need, and all of the answers that you need, so that you can effectively determine two things. Can you help them? And do you want to help them? And both of those are key. You have to ask yourself both those questions. And if the answers to both are yeses, great. Then you set up a next step, you give them a proposal, you tell them what it's going to look like, and how, what you heard them say. You should always summarize what you heard as the situation, and how your product or service is going to help resolve that, and what the timeline is, and all of that information. It pretty much eliminates objections, because you've already dealt with all of those things that usually lead to objections, right? If you don't stick to finding out what their budget tolerance is, you're probably going to have a price objection. If you don't identify what quality means to them, and what delivery means to them, and success means to them, you're probably not going to cover it specifically in your proposal. That could be an objection. So the way we totally avoid objections is asking enough questions so that we are sure that we have a really good understanding of what their situation is, who they are, how they motor. Can we help them? Do we want to help them? Is this going to be a good, mutually beneficial relationship moving forward, long term, that we're both going to feel good about? Because when you get into a new client relationship, it's like getting married. You are in it for the long haul. It's hard to get out of it. It's hard to problem solve sometimes. Communication gets a little weird. So you want to avoid that kind of thing. You don't want to go walking down the aisle until you are sure this is a real thing. Okay? So remember, prospecting is everything you do up until the meeting, and what you are prospecting toward is the meeting. Then when you are in the meeting, you aren't doing the talking. You're asking the questions, and you have a really comprehensive list of questions before you ever walk in the door. So you are going to ask your questions first, so you can get a really good understanding of what's going on with them, so that you can make your determination about how and if you can help them, and if you want to help them. And then you're going to propose based on that, and your proposal is going to summarize what you heard, and then connect what you heard to what your solution is. That is a winning sales process. Okay? So give it a whirl. Come back and join me next week when we're going to have another salon. We'll be talking more about things within the sales realm. We might be talking about monitoring your progress, which is a biggie. If you have any questions that come up between now and then, reach out. Let me know what they are. If there's anything that I've talked about in any of these in this series that doesn't make sense to you, or you'd like to get more information on, just let me know. Send me a message, send me an email, let me know. Happy to help. My goal with these is to get information out there about what really works in this day and age, and so that you can be more successful in your sales efforts. So think about it, make your list of questions, ask them, really listen to the answers, and propose accordingly. And I think you will find you will close more, better business, which I know isn't really very good English, but that's okay. You understand what I mean. So until next time, great to see you. Thanks for dropping in, and we'll talk next week.